I don't know that it's very clear that they've got it right at all. The simple fact is that on the security side, we remain with that dilemma. How do you assess people from the security risk perspective if you cannot have access to their histories? And obviously, if we're talking about people coming from a country like Syria, which is trapped between chaos and dictatorship and terrorism, then it would be highly unlikely that you'd be able to drop in as a security officer and get hold of reliable records and undertake any of the kinds of comprehensive investigation that would ordinarily be necessary to provide reasonable assurances about the security of a given individual bent on entering your country. If the screening is sufficiently comprehensive on both levels, then that would be acceptable, but it does seem difficult to imagine that, at least as regards the security side, this would be plausible. So that's a big issue. The other thing is that should there be the least evidence that questions remain when people have hit Canadian territory, then we face yet another problem, and this one of constitutional making. In 1985, the Supreme Court of Canada, in the Singh decision, decided that all people present in Canada, and that would include non-Canadians who are refugee claimants, have a right to what's known as due process. In other words, they have a right to go through the whole plethora of court proceedings, appeals, reviews, and so on. A good many of them, one can only imagine, at taxpayers' expense with lawyers and the rest. And one can only conceive of the cost of that, but above all, we know for a fact of the potential for the delays that can bring about. We've seen cases of individuals who, with no entitlement to remain in the country and being possible security threats, have been here for decades beyond their, shall we say, entitlement date. So that becomes another grave issue. There is the issue, too, of course, of accommodation of some of these newcomers on military bases, primarily as we understand it in Quebec and Ontario. This raises issues relating to the comfort, needless to say, of these people, integration issues and so on. But as well, one might wonder about the treatment of military personnel who've had every reasonable expectation of remaining in these billets and perhaps are facing a level of disruption that wouldn't be entirely consistent with our national security needs. What happens, for example, were we to find, as the Europeans have found, and as we have every reasonable expectation of finding, that there could be eruptions of a terrorist nature in Canadian metropolitan or other areas? Will we be able to gather and muster our forces in the way we would otherwise have expected to have done had everybody been in an ordered, organized way found on those bases as military personnel? It's a very difficult kind of issue. There's another matter that springs in relation to the apparent precedence that will be accorded women and children. This has, I think, put many people at relative ease with regard to some of the security concerns. But it does ignore the insistent problems that have been found in the past, where extremist ideology and even terrorism has been concerned. For example, we have seen that there's been no shortage of women involved in particularly Islamic extremist terrorism. Even recently, as we've seen in Europe, a suicide bombing attack. But well beyond that, as providers of material support, women have played a part as much in some ways as men might have, but also when it comes to indoctrinating third parties. We've seen cells of women in the West recruiting young women for service with terrorist groups in Syria. We have also noted that it has been a shared task, if I dare call it that, of men and women historically to indoctrinate their children for good or ill. And again, there's been no shortage of female indoctrination of children in favor of radical extremist and terrorist ends. There's another issue where it comes to children. What do we mean by children? If we're talking about individuals of, say, 16 to 18 or 19, well, again, we've seen ample evidence of people of that age in the ranks of terrorists. Indeed, we have seen evidence of people below the age of 16 in those ranks. That's been part of the purpose of ISIS operations and indoctrination. So all of these are issues that come together with our basic inability to know precisely what had been going on in the lives of so many of the people who will be newcomers back in Syria before they came to Canada, as to raise further concerns. I think Canadians should have had an opportunity to ask the basic question: should we be in the business of taking people from terrorist-ridden zones in this kind of way, particularly when you consider that we are having a demonstrable problem with radicalization in our own country? Indeed, the evidence for this proposition is painfully clear in the announcement not so long ago by the RCMP that they were having to divert fully 600 apparently highly specialized officers from important law enforcement tasks into the realm of counter-radicalization and counter-terrorism. It would appear, I think, to many that there could be no clearer indication that this is because the RCMP was being overwhelmed by the current challenges in those areas, and this concern has been reflected in a number of other significant Canadian police forces and other forces in the West. So when we then add to that issue of concern, it does wonder where this will go. And when you then super add to that the questions about our capacity to have any understanding of those who may be non-violent extremists in their ideology and who may pass that ideology on to others who may not share their penchant for non-violence, you can see that the potential is huge. So one wonders how appropriate this was at all. Then you consider that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is responsible for possibly 60 million refugee people in the world. And it raises further questions about the hierarchy we seem to have imposed on the situation and the privileged treatment accorded to some individuals who may or may not be as badly off, as unappealing as their conditions might be, as any number of others, including, say, victims of Boko Haram and other terrorist-type organizations. Hidden within all of the debates and so on relating to Syrian refugees is the taxing question: what are some of the underlying attitudes of people, including nonviolent people, or people who, at least for the moment, are expected to be nonviolent? There have been several interesting opinion surveys, one in particular from the Gulf area, that asked about possible sympathies that Syrian refugees may have. And the statistical findings seem to indicate that between 13 and 31% of Syrian refugees may feel some level of sympathy for ISIS. When you consider that, it does raise further questions, and there have been broader analyses that have suggested that perhaps Muslims in general may, from a percentage of about 10 and up, be sympathetic to various terrorist groups. Again, it's very difficult to interpret these things, but one thing that has caused some people pause when looking at the Syrian refugee attitudes vis-a-vis ISIS at, as I've said, between 13 and 31%, is that one can only then imagine what the total figure would be if you were to have added to that not simply ISIS, but also Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. Maybe how about Hamas and Hezbollah? This is something that should cause us to reflect very carefully in good faith about the future stability of our own jurisdiction.